At a recent meeting of Amazon shareholders, among the most closely watched issues debated, Amazon's use of facial recognition technology.
Black and brown people, regardless of economic status, rely more on their smartphones than others.
I know that we don't exactly have the strongest reputation on privacy right now.
Regulators say that YouTube illegally collected data from children, used it for profit.
How can a consumer or a constituent really have any sort of recourse against a company or an agency if they've been misidentified?
We can take human experience and we can bring that into the marketplace to be sold as behavioral data.
It's really hard for me to imagine a world without surveillance. It's kind of like asking someone to paint a picture of something that they've never seen or heard of or read about.
For the first time in American history, the most valuable companies, the ones with the highest stock market valuations, have as their raw material not oil, not coal, but personal information. The more personal, the better.
The unfortunate reality is that surveillance pays in our country, and there's a lot of opportunities for it, and a lot of people willing to pay whatever to get access to it.
Move quickly, sell everything we can. All innovation is good. That's sort of like the culture of the IT space. And I think it's important, even on behalf of investors, to take a step back and recognize that there may be products and services out there that are actually more harmful than the value they're contributing.
To me, when I think about surveillance capitalism, I think about the tracking, trading, and selling of personal information about our data and physical bodies by private entities. And so a historical example of that might look like in the days where a person or company was hired to track down runaway slaves and return them to their quote-unquote owners. And a modern iteration of that would be like third-party data mining companies that are tracking information about our activities online, as well as the way our body lives, works, and moves offline. Big data is a lot of what it sounds like. So it's like a massive volume and variety of data that's collected from a number of different places. And all of these things are layered together to create a profile on you. Social media companies will actually tell you they don't collect race data. That's actually not true. There's a number of different data points layered on top of each other that can give you a pretty good idea of what someone's race is, and it could be based on where they live, it could be things that you listen to, it could be any number of things. But when you add those data points up, it tells you a good amount about people's race, and particularly when it comes to both predatory marketing and exclusionary marketing. So not just whether or not you're going to target someone for subprime loans, but whether or not you're going to say, actually, I have a job and I don't necessarily want Black people applying for it. It can also be used for exclusionary purposes. There's a lot of ways in which law enforcement will seek to pay and gain access to a certain amount of information from private companies. We can be certain that there's third-party data mining companies that are gathering information on street protests as we speak and selling them to law enforcement. And so there's a lot of ways in which those things really work together to maintain a racial hierarchy in our society.
Federal investigators are tapping into the records from departments of motor vehicles without Americans' consent.
Surveillance isn't a question of, cookies on browsers. It's a question of, life or death. It's a question of, can you explore your sexuality in peace and without other people looking over your shoulder? It's a question of whether you can stay in this country if you're undocumented. When I think about the harms of surveillance and surveillance capitalism, I think about a woman named Maribel Cortez. This is a woman who lives in Rockville, Maryland, who has 5 kids. One day, one of those kids answered a knock at the door, and it was agents from Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Those agents came in, they took her husband, who had never committed any crime, never had any contact with law enforcement in this country, even though he'd been here decades.
No dieron ninguna explicación.
They didn't give an explanation.
Nomás lo arrestaron.
They just arrested him.
Se lo llevaron.
They took him.
The ICE agents tell him, you know how we found you? We found you through your driver's license. The interface that the ICE officers plugged into and accessed was built for them by a company called Palantir. And those final searches that helped them find Maribel's husband were coded by people in Silicon Valley working at the Palantir offices. Yet when Palantir goes public, it seems like a lot of the American public and it seems like a lot of the investment public doesn't really take notice. And that to me is frightening.
Our work around the issue of surveillance started really based in the concern of faith-based investors in our community around the impacts of surveillance technology on immigrants. What we wanted was first the companies to stop making this technology available to governments. So technologies that were being used to surveil like huge groups of people in real time without their consent. Companies had a profit model to sell and disperse and distribute that technology without really considering the potential negative impacts. When we first started engaging with Amazon on facial recognition surveillance technology, we were calling on the company to stop selling that technology to law enforcement. They're using that technology in investigations where racial bias or discriminatory policing practices are already used. Amazon's technology is just replicating that racism and those negative impacts, even if the technology on its surface is benign.
When I put on the white mask, detected. I take off the white mask, not so much.
Police departments often get their hands on surveillance equipment or information and may not even know how to use it, may not have to report on it. So things like Stingray, facial recognition technology, license plate readers. So then in terms of the types of bias that make Black people, for example, more likely to be targeted for false positives, arrested, you see that increase.
I was still guilty in their eyes until the pictures don't match. And they left them on the table and they looked at each other like, oops. It says this is used only for investigative purposes and not to arrest.
In Baltimore, they had a program where Amazon was giving out free Ring, and it seemed great for a lot of folks because they're like, oh, my home can be safer. But what that actually means is that that's a larger dragnet of surveillance that doesn't necessarily make you any safer, it just makes you more surveilled.
There's no public auditing to know whether there are complaints about abuse. How would the public ever know?
I don't think we know the total number of police departments that are using facial recognition technology.
If a company is just not even aware of who's using which form of its technology or how it might be used or misused, then it's exposing itself to an unknown amount of risk. As shareholder advocates, we are trying to encourage companies to manage those risks, not just because it contributes to long-term shareholder value creation, but also it makes them more responsible, sustainable businesses that contribute in a more positive way to society.
When our organization started investigating face recognition, we realized that a lot of police and a lot of government agencies had basically turned departments of motor vehicles into de facto surveillance databases. But at the time, we didn't think we could say, stop it. We didn't think we could say, these systems should be shut down. And over time, as advocates and as other researchers took up this mantle, they thought to say, no, I don't want this. I want to stop this. Something remarkable started to happen, which is they started passing bans on face recognition technology in Oakland, in San Francisco, in Somerville, in Cambridge, in Portland.
So with respect to surveillance technology, I think there's a first question of whether the technology is necessary and whether it's serving a beneficial function for society. Companies should be seeking guidance from people who are most impacted and who are experts and also who are critical of their business so they can learn from that and take that input into account.
that ability to force companies in a moment of reckoning to change how they do business, I think that is a tool in our arsenal that we have to think about how do we wield more intentionally.
When we talk about surveillance, you have to dream big. You have to dream of a society that isn't defined by surveillance, and you have to dream of a society that thinks it's possible to stop it, because it is possible to stop it.